What's up, snappers? Welcome back to the channel. DDDREWSKY here. Today we're gonna be looking at the brand new card Bullseye to see if he's worth your precious resources. We're gonna be looking at key synergies, counters, and some decks that I brewed for him. But wait, before we do that, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel. I do weekly reviews of the brand new card in Marvel Snap, so if you don't want to miss out, hit that notification bell right now. Let's get back into it. Now the question is, who is Bullseye? Let's take a look. So Bullseye in Marvel Snap is a 3-cost, 3-powered card with an activate ability of discard all cards that cost 1 or less from your hand, afflict that many different enemy cards with -2 power. So I believe his ability is really awesome for discard. The discard archetype is forever evolving, right? There is the traditional discard, and then there's discard with like helicarrier or collector. So this brings another element to discard. It brings another option if you want to afflict damage. You might create a new archetype for discard. I think it's really interesting. If you enjoy that type of style, then this is your card. All right, now let's take a look at some of the pros and cons about Bullseye. Let's take a look. So the first pro I want to talk about is targeted discard. Targeted discard we know works well in Marvel Snap. We have cards like Moon Knight now, Blade, for example. Those are great discard options. And Bullseye is a targeted discard. It's not really that random because you know what gets discarded. So Bullseye has the potential to create a brand new archetype, as in, discard afflicting damage. You haven't really seen that before, so it's really cool if you like discard. Another pro about him is that affliction is strong. We've seen archetypes like Ajax, even the toxic move decks. So yeah, he definitely has potential in becoming a meta staple, right? Another pro about him is that more discard targets in hand, the better. So if you're running a deck that are okay with discarding as much as possible, and then just reap all the benefits of, him throwing out all that negative power. So now let's talk about the cons about Bullseye. Activate at 3 costs is kind of tough. We've seen cards in the past that have a high cost. For example, like Symbiote Spider-Man 4 cost. 3 cost is kind of in the borderline of maybe he'd be possible to play, but we've noticed that, 2 costs is probably the highest they can go. So I'm a little bit worried about him being a 3 cost as an activate card, so you definitely have to be worried about that. So Bullseye is dependent on combo and draw. He is a combo card. Again, if you like that type of gameplay, then it's totally fine. But if you're someone like me, if you're really looking forward to a certain draw or a certain combo and you don't pull it off, it's really rough. Very dependent on what you draw and what kind of combo abilities you can do with Bullseye. So this is not really a con, but it's just something for you to think about. Would you choose Bullseye over Gambit? Gambit destroys cards, or he'll just destroy 1 card, or depending on how you build the deck. Bullseye does afflict multiple cards depending on how much you've discarded in your hand. But would you choose Gambit over Bullseye? I don't know, really depends on the situation or the type of deck you want to build. That's kind of something you have to contemplate in your head, or you could have them in the same deck as well. So another big con about him is the affliction worth all the effort? You're gonna be discarding a lot of cards. Is it worth all the -2 damage that you're gonna be dealing with on the board? Is it gonna be worth having no cards in your hand or on the board? There's a lot of question marks, right? So is it worth all the effort that you're doing to get that -2 power on the board against your opponent? All right, now let's talk about some of the synergies and counters for Bullseye. Let's take a look. So the first synergy that I want to talk about is Swarm. Of course, Swarm is one of the best cost cards you can discard and then get that 0 cost Swarm. And then you could use those Swarms as pretty much ammo for Bullseye. So Swarms are definitely a prime candidate to pair up with Bullseye. Scorn is another option because Scorn is a 1 cost card, especially if you're discarding Scorn, then you get more power built up on the board. That +2 from her is really good. So she's another option for Bullseye. Another great combo is Calling Wing. Of course, she discards those low cost cards, and then you can follow up again with Bullseye once you activate him. So she's just another enabler for Bullseye. So now let's talk about the counters. Red Guardian, of course, he is an activate. I should say Bullseye is an activate card. Red Guardian is a great counter against Bullseye. The Master Mold is another great counter against Bullseye because if your opponent is flooding your hand, you don't really have the control of discarding certain cards, so it definitely could throw off your combo potential especially when targeted discard. It really depends on what's in your hand, right? Like the order of your cards in your hand. Cable is another counter for a Bullseye, especially if they take a card, for example, like if they steal your Swarm or Scorn, then you might be straight out of luck, right? So Cable definitely can counter Bullseye. All right, now let's take a look at some of the decks that I brewed. I think they're pretty fun and competitive. Let's take a look. So the first deck that we have is called Classic Bullseye Discard. So this is my take on the traditional discard. I think a lot of people will be focused on using this type of archetype as the shell for Bullseye. I think it'd be pretty fun and competitive. So the ideal goal of this deck is to discard whatever you can and just juice up a lot of power for Dracula and reap all the benefits of discarding as much as possible. So for turn one, you definitely want to run Blade over Scorn. Scorn you definitely want to keep in your hand for the most part. If you really are desperate, maybe near the end turns, you run Scorn. Turn two, Morbius is okay on curve. You definitely have to be careful of counters, but turn two is fine with Morbius. Swarm you probably want to keep in your hand. This is your main ammo for Bullseye, so you definitely want to keep Swarm in hand. Potentially in the later turns, you could run Swarm to flood lanes, but you definitely want to keep Swarm in your hand for the most part. Calling Wing, you definitely want to use her to start discarding cards like Swarm or Scorn, so she definitely can be played on curve. Bullseye is awesome on turn three to play on curve, just to set him up, and then you could activate him when you have like the right cards in your hand, especially Scorn and Swarm. Corvus you can play on curve just to start discarding cards. It really depends on what's in your hand, but you definitely want to use Corvus if you have Swarm or Scorn in hand. Definitely don't want to discard a card that you can potentially, you know, ruin your potential. Lady Sif is primarily used for Apocalypse. You could even use Lady Sif to hit Proxima Midnight as well. Definitely don't want to use her to accidentally discard MODOK. For turn four, Dracula is awesome to be played on curve just because, you know, you want to set up that lane and to juice up as much as you possibly can with APOC. Proxima Midnight, you definitely want to keep in hand. You want to discard her to get that free play of her. MODOK on turn five is amazing. You definitely want to use MODOK, but you have to be careful what's in your hand, and it really depends on the situation and with your hand. But MODOK, if you want to wipe out as much as possible or just to generate more swarms, MODOK is great on turn five. APOC, definitely want to probably keep in your hand for the most part, or if you really need that power at the end play, you can definitely run APOC after he's been generating all this power with this deck. All right, now let's take a look at my second list. So this list is called the Bullseye Target Practice. So this is another take on discard, but it's involving using Wong, maybe use some Gambit, and even Bullseye just to reap a lot of damage and destroying cards. So for turn one, keep Scorn in your hand. Blade is another great option just to play and just start discarding cards. Morbius Collector on turn two is awesome just to start filling up those lanes, just setting up your power lanes. Victoria hand definitely can be played on curve, but you probably want to save her at the later turns. But yeah, she has great synergy with Swarm. Calling Wing, it really depends on what's in your hand. You definitely want to use her to discard Scorn or Swarm. But for turn three, you definitely want to start setting up Bullseye just to get his activate rolling whenever you want. But yeah, he definitely wants more swarms and, you know, possibly a Scorn in their hand. Gambit is another option. You probably want to save Gambit with Wong, but depending on the situation, you could definitely run Gambit. For turn four, of course, Wong, you definitely want to set up the Wong lane. You definitely want to combo Wong with Gambit. Bullseye doesn't work with Wong, but Wong is awesome if you want to just wreak havoc on your opponent. MODOK on turn five is basically just to generate more ammo, like more swarms, generate more power with Scorn. Definitely those are the main targets for MODOK. APOC is another great hit for MODOK or any of these other cards like Calling Wing. Calling Wing can definitely hit him, or Blade. So there's definitely value there. All right, now let's take a look at my third and final list. So this deck is called Good Aim Bullseye. So the goal of this list is to discard as much as possible, get some value with good stats, and just reap all the benefits from Collector and Helicarrier Chaos. So for turn one, definitely save Scorn. You definitely don't want to play her. Maybe in the later turns you can. Turn two, start setting up the Collector is fine, or even Victoria hand. Calling Wing is another awesome option on turn two just to start generating discarding of Swarm and Scorn. For turn three, definitely set up Bullseye, set up that activate lane. It really depends on the situation of your hand, but you can definitely run him or activate him once you have Scorn and Swarm in the hand. Moon Knight is awesome to start generating some discarding for your opponent. It'll get stature down to 1 cost, and you can potentially hit either Proxima Midnight or Helicarrier. So those are definitely great options for Moon Knight. Corvus Glaive is here just to start discarding a lot of cards. You can hit like Scorn, Swarm, or even a duplicated Swarm. Definitely want to use Corvus, and he can even potentially hit Proxima Midnight as well. Black Bolt is great on turn 5 just to start discarding cards from your opponent's hand, and then stature gets value from that. So for turn 6, Helicarrier could be played, but Helicarrier is really used to be discarded. Depending on what cards you get from Helicarrier, you can play out on the board. All right, now let's look at the spotlights that are featured with Bullseye. Let's take a look. So Bullseye is paired up with Kyra and Marvel Boy. Bullseye is a Series 5 card, Kyra is a Series 5 card, and Marvel Boy is Series 5. I believe both Kyra and Marvel Boy are definitely worth picking up. Kyra is great if you want to protect your 1-cost cards. She's awesome against Destroy. Marvel Boy is amazing as well, just to juice up Zoo style decks. If you like Zoo, I think Marvel Boy is definitely worth getting. So for the Spotlight variants, Bullseye looks awesome. I believe it's Pandart. I think the art style is really cool and very mysterious. I definitely think he's worth picking up. So for the Kyra variant, I love her pose. I love the art style of Kyra. I think she's definitely worth picking up. Marvel Boy, I'm not really huge into anime. That's just my personal preference. I'm not really big into this one. I believe the one with him with the headphones is much better. I believe that one's in the shop. So it's definitely more affordable than getting this one. So remember guys, to have 4 keys before opening in a week, you definitely don't want to miss out on a card that you really want to get. All right, now let's take a look at my star ratings for Bullseye. Let's take a look. So for competitive, I gave him a 3 stars. I believe that he has potential, but I'm very worried that he's a 3-cost activator. So that's a huge negative in my opinion. So I would say 3 stars, depending on what you can do with the combos they could do. It really depends on your hand, the draw as well. So I would say 3 stars is fair for him. For fun, I would say 3.5 stars. I believe people do love affliction, right? They love the afflicting damage to your opponents. It has become part of the meta in Marvel Snap. So I would say definitely 3.5 stars is fair for Bullseye. For flexibility, I would say 2 stars. We know discard is very niche. It's its own archetype, right? It could make a own brand new archetype with affliction and discarding potentially, but I would say more or less he's gonna find a home, and discard, we all know, is very, very niche. So 2 stars. For future changes, 3.5 stars. I would say maybe potentially he'll get buffed. Maybe he'll drop down to a 2-cost. It really depends on how he performs in the meta, but I believe 3.5 stars, I think he'll get eventually changed. I think he'll be buffed, honestly. I think he's primarily kind of weak with his stat line. So we'll see. It really depends on how he performs. All right, now let's take a look at my final review of Bullseye. Is he worth a snap or skip? Let's take a look. So I say skip on Bullseye. I believe he's a little bit too niche for my liking. I don't believe he has the potential, honestly, especially being a 3-cost activator. So I'm a little bit worried about this card. Hopefully, maybe he'll get buffed in the future. Definitely drop him down to a 2-cost. I don't see anything wrong with that. But yeah, I don't really see the potential of afflicting enough damage to your opponents. Is it worth, all that effort of discarding your cards? And Luke Cage is a thing, right? Especially with Luke Cage being around, that kind of negates Bullseye. I totally forgot to mention that as my counters for this card, but yes, Luke Cage does exist. So there's a lot of negative things about this card. So let me know what you think about Bullseye. Let me know in the comments below. Am I completely wrong about this card? Did I miss any synergies? Did I miss any decks that are featured with him? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel. I would love for you to be a part of this amazing community here on YouTube, and I'll see you guys on the next Snapper Skip. Happy snapping.